The Sakhir Grand Prix delivered us the fifth different winner of the 2020 season, but it perhaps wasn't the winner we were anticipating. Especially after the start, the Mercedes of George Russell looks set to be on the top step and for the young Brit to take his first win, let alone his first points in Formula One. But in true 2020 fashion, a mistake in the pits caused it all to come tumbling down for Mercedes. So, what happened? How did Mercedes blow that race? John and Luke, you're here to help me explain what happened, because it all got very complicated very quickly, and it all came down to a rogue safety car and perhaps a little bit of poetic justice. So John, give us a quick recap of what happened and what was the turning point of the race for Mercedes.
So we'd look set for, I think, one of the most sensational Grand Prix performances we've seen from someone in a long time. George Russell, 7 days ago, was racing for Williams. Suddenly, Lewis Hamilton's taken on coronavirus. George steps into it, handed the best car, tremendous pressure to perform, didn't fit properly in his seat, had to wear boots that were a size too small to fit in the cockpit. So everything working against him, and he was simply sensational all weekend. Missed out on pole by 26 thousandths, led away cleanly at the start of the race. Everything under control, nice little gap to Valtteri Bottas in second place, all going smoothly. And then in 2020 style of irony, his car, his old Williams being driven by Jack Aitken, spins at the final corner. The front wing comes off, is left on the track. There's a brief virtual safety car period, which then turns full safety car, and Mercedes elect to pit their cars as a safety stop. They didn't need to do it, but a safety stop to protect their lead, protect their 1-2, and it all went wrong. And I think, Luke, you spoke to Toto at those moments. Just explain to us what happened.
Yeah, so Toto Wolff was understandably in quite a regretful mood, I think is the right way to put it, after that race. He was obviously very disappointed and felt very, very sorry for George Russell. But I asked him, can you explain what exactly happened in that sequence of events? Because we saw a lot of movement around the tyres and a lot of confusion, I think, among those Mercedes mechanics, followed by a very long stop for Valtteri Bottas, and then to have him fitted with the same tyres that he'd gone into the pits on. So very, very frustrating. And I asked Toto about it, and it turned out it was a radio failure that basically meant that George Russell's side of the garage, they did not get the full communication as to what the plan was and what tyres they needed for George's car. That meant George came in and there was a tyre mix-up as they were waiting to double stack the cars and service George and then service Valtteri soon after. And that meant that the front two tyres on George Russell's car actually belonged to Valtteri Bottas, and they were placed on. They sent George on his way. He looked okay, looked to be retaining his lead. And then when Bottas pulled into the pit box, they quickly realised that they didn't have all of Valtteri's tyres on hand, and that's because they were already on the car that was already speeding down the pit lane and was back out onto the track. So there was nothing they could do about it. That then led them to refit the tyres to Valtteri's car that he came in on. That meant the tyres lost all of their temperature, so he was very, very cold for the restart, let alone tyres that had already done, I think, about 16 or 18 laps into that stint, whereas all the others around him were on hot, fresh mediums. And it really did just sort of set the tone for Mercedes' race. That is where it all fell down. And as we'll come on to, George Russell did have that puncture late on that really was sort of the final blow, but that was ultimately where the race turned in that pit sequence. And it was a rare sort of slip up from Mercedes. I saw comparisons to the 2019 German Grand Prix, obviously, where Netflix famously were on site, and it was that pit stop that went absolutely horribly wrong for the whole team. And it was a similar kind of vibe today, I think. And I think they're going to look at that and definitely try and review it, because it was a big, big mistake to make that ultimately did play a part in costing them this race.
So guys, was this a one-off occurrence that just happened, that the radios weren't quite working? Because what were the specifics there? I heard that the radios didn't go off in the right way, or that there was some chatter that meant that Russell had sent a message back and the other pit crew hadn't heard it, and there was a lot of confusion. So was this something that can be rectified by Mercedes, or was it just one of those things where it just doesn't go your way?
The steward's statement regarding the incident, because it was a rules breach, so they did have to look into it and investigate it. They said that there was a miscommunication because there was a transmission from the radio of George Russell to the pits that went over the top basically of another communication, which seems to be the one that was meant to have gone to the pit crew explaining what tyres George was meant to be on. So it was a bit of a mix up, and that is again something Mercedes will definitely learn from. They always do, and the stewards obviously did look into it, and in the end decided to give no penalty bar a €20,000 fine. They said that although Mercedes did break the rules and they could have disqualified George from the race because ultimately used another driver's tyres, that there was no sporting advantage gains, that Mercedes did move to rectify it as soon as possible. They lost a lot from the mistake anyway, and they said it's just a loophole that they need to get fixed in the rules. But yeah, it's one of those errors that Mercedes, as they always do, will learn from and rectify for the future, I'm sure.
And if that wasn't enough, Russell almost managed to rectify that mistake. He had the fresh tyres, as you said. He came in for the set that should have gone on the car, and was seemingly crawling his way back up through the pack and looked quite pacey and like he was going to charge Perez down or at least get a podium, and then disaster hits twice. And I think George was saying after the race, he couldn't believe that the race was taken away from him once, let alone twice. But John, it might have actually been again a occurrence from his Williams car causing him to have a slow puncture, we reckon.
Yeah, so he, after safety car, he'd come out behind Valtteri, but on the right compound tyre, the medium tyre. And this was when George was brilliant again, just really aggressive, bided his time, but there was a slight sniff of being able to take position when Valtteri ran wide at turn 4 and that sequence up into the chicane. George was decisive, aggressive, brilliant, seized the moment, went through and looked to be on his way, started closing down the gap to Perez. Whether he would have closed that, we don't know, but the slow puncture came. He didn't want to believe it was true, but he felt the car crabbing a bit and came in. But it was clear he picked the puncture up from debris somewhere on the track, and it may well be that his old Williams car, a bit of carbon left over from that, could have caused the puncture. So his own car would have cost him basically twice the victory today.
You can't write it this season, can you? Like, if that is the case, you actually couldn't write the script for this season if you tried. It's just so brilliantly bonkers. But obviously he's gutted. He's absolutely heartbroken. That should have been a win for him and at least a good haul of points and a podium, and he's had to settle for just 3 points, which is still his first points in Formula One. So it should be a happy story, but look, he's going to be absolutely reeling tonight, isn't he?
He is, yeah, and George admitted, like, he was in all of his post-race interviews, he did sound very, very down and quite upset, and there's a picture of him on social media sort of laying down in the grass, and you can see he's kind of just trying to think about everything that's happened. And he said that he spoke to his parents very, very soon after the race and that they were able to give him a real sort of pick-me-up, which is really good. Talks out with Toto Wolff, James Vowles, Pete Bonington, his race engineer as well, just to go over everything. And yeah, ultimately, it's a very mixed emotions for him, because as much as he will be reeling, as you say, and sad and distraught at the fact of losing the possibility for a Grand Prix win, he was fighting at the front again. That's something he's not done for close to 2 years. It was not since he was in Formula 2 that he was doing that. And I said to him, like, how did that feel, getting that flame back? And he said it did feel good. And he said ultimately you're still wanting to maximise whatever you can do in the car, wherever you are, no matter what position you're fighting for. But when you're fighting for victory, everything is heightened, everything goes up a notch. And it was only about halfway through the race that he really thought, I can win this. Like, I'm looking pretty good for this. And he was very, very confident. He felt fired up on that final charge that ultimately did end with that puncture. But Toto Wolff summed it up very well, and he said this isn't a sad day for Mercedes. It's obviously frustrating that they missed out on a victory, that George didn't have that fairy tale start to the team that he wanted. But he performed incredibly well. He surpassed all expectations. And I think, as George himself said, he really hopes he's given Toto Wolff a bit of a problem for the future. And I think there's no doubt about it. He has definitely done that.
That's definitely something that he's going to have to take away. He really did show his brilliance. I was saying to John earlier offline that it gave me goosebumps to watch him, because you really just did see almost like the potential unleashed of what George Russell might be able to do in the future. So we'll have to look out whether that is potentially 2022 seat, but no doubt he stamped his authority on what he can do in Formula One today. But John, is he going to get another crack at the whip? Are we going to see him back in a Mercedes this year, or is he going to have to wait until there is a vacancy at Mercedes?
I think a lot will depend on the next 48 hours in terms of how Lewis Hamilton is recovering from coronavirus, and then the procedures to get him into Abu Dhabi, because we're heading into they're locking down the Yas Island where the circuit is based. No one's allowed in, no one's allowed out once the week started. So they would need some special dispensation to get Lewis in if he fulfills his 10 days of quarantine. So that's a developing story that we may find out Monday, Tuesday this week as we go forward. If Lewis isn't there, George will be back in the car. If not, he'll be in the Williams. But I think whatever happens in Abu Dhabi, George has proven today that he is Mercedes' future in Formula One.
So does Bottas have to watch his back, do we think?
Yeah, completely. He does. And there's no other way to sum it up, really. He really does. Toto Wolff, again, when he was asked about it, and he said that it's too early to sort of say what George's performance means for the future. But the idea of having him alongside Lewis for next year was put to him. And obviously, we know that's not going to happen. Valtteri Bottas has a contract in place. But Toto said that could be pretty wild. He said it would be a bit of a wild ride, I believe, were the exact words that he used, if you had a Russell and Hamilton partnership. So I think that's definitely one to look for the future. And I think that we spoke a lot about this going into this weekend, the permutations and how both drivers, Bottas and Russell, could come out with their stock increased. Valtteri Bottas has come out this weekend really, I think, maybe an all-time low in terms of where he is, in terms of how safe he is at Mercedes. And no matter how much confidence Toto Wolff may profess to have in him, I think this weekend has proven that George Russell is more than capable of stepping into that car and performing, and was really just a cut above Valtteri Bottas all weekend.
So it remains to be seen. We'll have to wait to see how this plays out, but it's been a rather strange yet wonderful end to the Formula One season as we go into the final round in Abu Dhabi, which maybe we'll see George Russell back in a Mercedes, maybe we'll see Lewis Hamilton return. We'll have to wait and find out, but make sure you stay tuned to autosport.com and motorsport.com, where we will be breaking the news as and when we hear it, and let us know what you thought of Russell's debut in a Mercedes today. Leave your opinions in the comments below, and until next time, we'll see you then.